You're on the president's national panel that's working on increasing public trust in police departments while also increasing public safety. Why were you chosen to be on that panel?
Well, to be honest, I can't tell you why. I mean, there was a lot of people that were interested, and there was no application process or anything. I do know Commissioner Ramsey, who was the chair of the panel, and we were discussing that the panel was being formed. I said, sure, I'd love to serve on that, and I didn't hear anything for a couple months, and then they started the background process and ended up being selected. So I'm very, very happy with that.
And you recently went to Washington, D.C. to have a meeting of this panel. What did you guys discuss?
Well, that was actually the closeout meeting. We've been meeting since by phone late December, but then we started our in-person meetings in January and February, and we produced the interim report in March. And then we just met in Camden with the president and at a event that was held there in Camden, New Jersey. And we finalized the report and issued the final report. And as of last Friday, the task force has been disbanded now.
And this is a report to make recommendations to any other police force in the country?
Actually,
or what was the purpose?
It's for policing across the whole gamut. And it came out with 6 different pillars that we talked about, plus 2 overarching pillars. And it's geared towards building trust between police departments and communities, and also answering other questions such as use of force, policy and oversight training, technology, social media, and health and welfare of the officers.
What are some of the specific recommendations you came up with?
Well, the first one, which we felt was overarching, was that there had to be some teeth put into this report. And usually the best way to do that is through funding. And since this is offered through the Bureau of Justice Assistance of the COPS office, and a lot of funding goes to local and state law enforcement agencies from that entity, that we recommended that funding being tied to the recommendations of the task force. Now, it sounds like the president might be leaning that way, but it hasn't formally been announced yet.
And how would you evaluate the Tucson Police Department doing in terms of relationships with the community and increasing that public trust?
I think that we do quite well, but I think that you can go to any agency in this country and you can find people that will say great things and you can find people that will say bad things. We've had some issues here, which I think probably went into some of the decision as to why I was selected, with immigration enforcement and SB 1070. That caused some very divisive times for the community, between the agency and between the people, that we serve, and some elements of the community who felt that the law was really targeting them. And this is exactly what I predicted when this law was first written, saying that this would divide the department from segments of the community, and oftentimes that's segments that are, need us the most at times, yet they would be afraid to call us. And so if you talk to some of those people, they'll probably say the relationship's not as good as it could be. You talk to other people, though, and they'll say it's a great relationship. And I think every department across the country has some of that. But overall, knowing both sides of the coin here, I think that we have pretty good relationships. The fact that we didn't have any major issues post-Ferguson and post-New York, and then in several protests that we've had before, with the Occupy protests, we've never had significant major incidents, and that's because we spent a lot of time building our relationships when there's no problems, as opposed to waiting until after there's a problem.
So you've been outspoken about the challenges that your police department and others in the state have had to deal with in enforcing the state's SB 1070, the immigration enforcement law, the challenges it placed on police departments. Can you talk about what you've learned in those experiences? There have been some protests during police arrests or investigations of citizenship. What did you learn in those?
Oftentimes, this is a political environment, and things would be said that weren't exactly accurate, but it helped the political cause that was there. And allegations would be made that when we looked into them didn't bear out that way, or if we asked for someone to come forward to verify that allegation, the response was often, well, they don't want to.
Let me ask you to get a little specific.
Sure,
what are you referencing?
We'd get a complaint that officers were doing something, let's say that they were working with Border Patrol or doing something along those lines. And we say, okay, we would like to look into that. Can you tell us what you know, where this occurred, what time? Because it would be a second party complaint. And they would often say, well, no, the person doesn't want to come forward because they're afraid that if they do, that there'll be some negative repercussion towards them, which is what we talked about that this law would cause, because victims of crime, if they don't feel comfortable enough to come forward to talk to police, then we're losing valuable information, and we're creating a victim class out there that we don't want to do, because then people will say, okay, well, people who look like they are potentially here illegally could be a good person to victimize because they won't call the cops. So we had issues with that we really tried to overcome and try and establish rapport with the community and say that we have these things that are going on, and you can come talk to us. And we had to change some of our policies and some of our procedures to make sure people felt comfortable and knew that they could either talk to us when they're a victim of a crime or report what they considered misconduct without us taking enforcement action towards them.
You brought up the concept of the appearance of someone being in the country illegally. Describe the police department's policy on racial profiling or even class profiling, socioeconomic questions.
Well, that was one of our big concerns with the law to begin with, because when it came out, it said it had certain requirements of police officers. And the governor put out an edict saying that Arizona Post, which is our police officer standards and training, would come up with what standards would be to develop reasonable suspicion for someone being in the country illegally. Now, police have always been very good at establishing reasonable suspicion for criminal behavior. We have never established reasonable suspicion for status. How do you do that? I mean, how do you say someone looks like they do this? You have to look at different things and a variety of different things. And other than someone admitting that they're in the country illegally, there's no one thing that can say, all right, this person is here illegally. So we had to talk to the people who do that for a living, the federal agencies. We talked with lawyers, we talked with Arizona Post, and they came up with a list of items that you could consider. But you had to consider them in totality. Any one of those items, other than an admission, could not develop reasonable suspicion. So in other words, it could be no identification, no known address, in the company of others that you know are here illegally. You have to start piling these things up together to establish the reasonable suspicion. And it's still very difficult because a lot of those things can be explained away.
How would you evaluate the progress or the evolution of enforcing that law, SB 1070, in the years that it's been in effect? Is it calming down? Is it getting easier, changing at all?
Well, to be honest, probably because of the sensitivity and the political leanings of Tucson, we put more emphasis on that law than other areas where it was felt this would be such a problem, because they didn't have such a focused resistance to the law. And so quite often I was getting, accused of things here because it's a very active community that is supportive of immigration issues here. And so we developed some very good ways of gathering statistics on what were our stops, what were the things that we were encountering, how many times were we contacting Border Patrol, how many times were Border Patrol responding, and so forth and so on. And what we discovered is that of all the times we contact Border Patrol, less than 1% of the time would they respond out to the scene. And only about half of those times would they actually take someone into custody. So when you are contacting them 18,000 times and they only come out about 100 times and only take someone in custody about 50 or 60 times, you start to realize what a waste of resources this whole thing was.
Those numbers you just gave, are they annual?
No, I don't know, but they were like, I think, a 15-month period that we looked at. And in actual, they were lower than we expected, which means it's a constant effort to try and retrain the officers into what they're supposed to do, because there's two provisions when SB 1070 requires officers to check on someone's status. One, when they stop someone legally and they develop reasonable suspicion that they feel for some reason this person's in the country, they're supposed to check. The other one is, and there's caveats of what excuse you from checking. So in other words, if you provide government issued identification, tribal identification, there's 4 items that you can provide, which is considered presumptive identification, in that no longer do you have to pursue the investigation on national status. But if you arrest someone, and a lot of traffic offenses are criminal arrests, you know, a DUI or a suspended license, things of that nature, you're obligated to check with Border Patrol. And you don't get a choice in that matter. And so trying to encourage and mandate where officers need to check according to the law, we still have some officers who are not used to doing that, and we're constantly saying, okay, if it fits this criteria, you have to check. And then changes came about when the president issued his executive order about what priority enforcements were for Homeland Security, and which encompasses Border Patrol and ICE. So what we finally ended up doing was we're following the guidelines that Border Patrol is following as far as their priority enforcement. If the individuals don't meet the criteria of their priorities, which are their felons, their terrorist threats, they're gang members, or they have multiple misdemeanors, they don't enforce their deportation proceedings. Well, we're following the same guidelines as to when we contact them. If the individual fits those criteria, we contact them. If they don't, we don't. We document.
We've heard in some of the other cities that have had protests after police incidents, shootings, deaths at police hands, questions about the diversity of the police force. Can you tell us what the diversity makeup is of the Tucson Police Department versus the community?
We're very close to the community. The one area, two areas where we could improve are African American representation and female representation. And I think every agency can improve on female representation because it's a male-dominated profession still, although we've made great strides. I think we're at about 14% female right now. Obviously, we'll be closer to 50%. And African American, we're only about, I think it's 2.5%, yet the population within the community is 4.5%. All the others, we're very close to community population.
Along the same lines, the other cities have dealt with complaints or protests regarding police use of force. What is the process the Tucson Police Department goes through if a member of the public alleges excessive use of force?
Well, there's actually a few ways that you can report complaints about police conduct within Tucson. One is through our internal affairs section. If it's an allegation of excessive force, that can result in a criminal investigation as well as an administrative investigation. It just depends on the circumstances. The other is through the independent police auditor. A complaint can come in through them, and they also can be contacted if you feel that the internal affairs complaint wasn't done appropriately. We also have the Citizen Police Advisory Review Board, who monthly they meet with us and they do random audits of our investigations, that people can come to them with complaints, and they also determine things that are going on within our agency and what we're doing.
Now, you're doing a program called Coffee with a Cop, where people
Yes.
can actually go sit down and speak with an officer in a more informal setting. And also, over the Memorial Day weekend, you did some kind of on-the-street opportunities for people to take a blood alcohol test through a breathalyzer or a device that detects the alcohol concentration on the breath. Are these efforts to trying to get police out into the community in non-enforcement?
They're all part of it, and we've been doing this for a while, even before the task force report came out. But the task force report talks about establishing relationships, and we've been doing things such as Coffee with a Cop, and it's just an opportunity to talk with a police officer in a non-threatening environment, in a adversarial or confrontational environment where there's no enforcement action going on. Ask questions that you always wanted to know. Why do you guys do this? What do you do this? Hey, I saw this. Why did you guys do that? It gives us an opportunity to explain to people what we do, why we do the things we do, the problems that we face. We can talk about some of our resource issues or some of our equipment issues, and it's really a great opportunity just to establish those relationships that we keep talking about before there's issues, when you still have, everyone's talking to each other, and we develop an understanding of what each perspective faces, and that's very useful.
Last year, after the NCAA college basketball tournament ended, or the University of Arizona's eligibility in that tournament ended, there was a situation in which an officer pushed a bystander at a large gathering and was suspended for his actions, and actually the city ended up in a settlement of a lawsuit about that action. How does that type of activity, when there is an incident like that, how does that balance with your other efforts to improve relations with the
Well,
community?
that was very, traumatic for the community. It shed a bad light on us. It put us in a bad light, but we also learned a lot from that, and we were able to improve from that. We put together what's called a board of inquiry, where we have senior commanders within the agency and all the involved people come in. We gather all the investigative reports. We had video cameras, which we had never used before up until that time, and we were trying to find out if this is a path we wanted to go, and so we borrowed 50 cameras to put on officers for that event. So we had to view all of that video. We had media requests coming in. There was, worldwide interest in that event. And we evaluated every step that we took in that process, and we said, what could we do better? What responsibility does the agency have? What responsibility does the individual have? And where do we go from here? Because we knew we were going to be back there this year. And if you remember, this year we came out in a whole different look. We didn't have the riot gear. We had officers out there beforehand mingling with the crowd. We devised some of those little wristbands, the rubber wristbands that had Bear Down, TPD, Bear Down with Pride, and we joined with the U of A and their logo, which was Bear Down with Pride, to try and just connect with the community, and those things were a hit. We didn't know how popular those bands were, and we ran out of them in the Sweet 16 game, and we ordered more to get them here for the Elite 8 game. And it was just a whole different view. I was out there on Main Gate Square that day, walking around and talking to people, and it was just a whole different vibe. There was no adversarial thing. Everyone was laughing, talking, joking together, and it was a different view. However, I do have to always say, it's different having a game at 2 or 3 in the afternoon as opposed to 8 o'clock at night when people have been drinking all day, and it made a different environment, but it actually went beautiful this time.
You mentioned body cameras. How many officers are using those now?
72.
Out of the total force number, how much is that?
In patrol, I have about 500 or 600 officers in patrol, and that's usually where your body cameras are used. I have my motorcycle officers all have the body cameras on them because they have some of the highest contact with the public. And then we have a squad in each patrol division that has them. So it comes out to a total of 72 cameras. So it's a good start because there's still questions that, until you start a program, you don't know the total effect. And the biggest issues are costs of storage, costs of redaction, the public information requests that come in for video, what do we release, how do we release it, and so forth. So we're learning all that this year to see if we're going to be able to expand the program next year.
You've announced your retirement, that you'll be out of this position by the end of the year. Mm-hmm. Why is that, and what's your date?
Well, that's part of our retirement system. So it's not that I want to leave or anything. It was a financial decision that a lot of us made 5 years ago when the city changed its retirement benefits. And it was an incentive to get more senior people to look at retirement so the city could save money in the long run. And so we're going to lose a good chunk of seniority this year, and myself included in that. So the end date at the latest, December 31st for me. I have to leave by that time. If something comes up before then, who knows, but I'm not actively looking. This is my home. I would love to take this through, but if a good opportunity presents itself, then I would consider it.
What do you mean by good opportunity? A person poised
to
come in?
I'm talking about another employment opportunity for me.
What is the process of ensuring that your successor keeps up with all the policies and all the things that we've talked about here?
Well, you remember, direction is given by mayor and council, and they set the direction of how they want the agency, and they can't mandate how I do things as the chief of police. I'm responsible by charter for public safety, but they definitely talk and say, this is how we would like our city to be represented. And of course, I want to comply with that. I work for the city manager, and so those are the constants that will still be there. We're getting a new city manager here in the next month or so, but the process that will be taken to replace me will take into consideration all the community desires of what do they want to see from their next chief of police, what does the community groups that will be represented expect from the police department, And there's been an organization called Police Executive Research Forum, which is a very prominent national think tank and recruiting organization that has entered into contract with the city of Tucson to run the search process for my replacement.
So that's already underway.
Yes.
Tucson Police Chief Roberto Villaseñor, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.